The saga of Patriarch Photius in the 9th century reads almost like a Byzantine courtroom drama, except that the courtroom was not just marble and ink, it was the empire itself, with political maneuvering, religious rivalry, and the fate of orthodoxy hanging in the balance. Photius, a man of immense intellect and fiery temperament, found himself at the intersection of imperial ambition and ecclesiastical authority, a position that made him both a brilliant strategist and a lightning rod for controversy. Photius' rise to power began under unusual circumstances. In 857 AD, the sitting Patriarch of Constantinople, Ignatius, was deposed by Emperor Michael III, largely due to conflicts between the Patriarch and the emperor's court. Ignatius represented the old guard of church authority, a faction that sought to limit imperial interference in ecclesiastical matters. Photius, a layman at the time, was suddenly thrust into the patriarchal throne, a move that would spark decades of conflict. His appointment was extraordinary. Not only was he rapidly elevated from a secular scholar to patriarch, but his academic brilliance and eloquence made him a formidable figure in theological debates. The controversies surrounding Photius' elevation quickly became both a political and spiritual firestorm. Supporters of Ignatius viewed Photius' appointment as illegitimate, framing it as a dangerous example of imperial overreach into church affairs. In 858 AD, Pope Nicholas I entered the fray, questioning the legality of Photius' consecration and asserting the authority of Rome over Constantinople. This clash was far more than a quarrel over a single man's legitimacy, it was an early indicator of the growing tensions between Eastern and Western Christianity, presaging the eventual schism that would formalize centuries later. Photius, however, was not merely a passive participant in these debates. His intellectual rigor and diplomatic skill enabled him to mount a vigorous defense of his position. In his letters and theological treatises, he argued that the emperor had the right to appoint patriarchs in cases of necessity and that his own elevation was canonical given the unique circumstances of Ignatius' deposition. He skillfully framed the controversy as a question of ecclesiastical autonomy under imperial guidance, emphasizing the delicate balance between church independence and state oversight, a balance that Byzantium had struggled with for centuries. The trial of Photius, often referred to as the Photian Schism, saw the intertwining of theology, politics, and diplomacy. In 861, a synod convened in Constantinople reaffirmed Photius' patriarchate and condemned his detractors, yet Rome rejected these decisions, leading to a broader ecclesiastical rupture. The trial revealed more than disagreements over canonical law, it was a battle for influence in the Christian world. Both Constantinople and Rome sought to assert their supremacy, with smaller churches and states forced to navigate the tensions between these powerful centers. Photius' erudition became a tool of political leverage, he was as much a diplomat and statesman as a religious leader. Interestingly, Photius' personal character played a critical role in both the controversy and its resolution. He was known for his sharp intellect, immense memory, and literary skill. His Bibliotheca, a collection of excerpts and summaries of hundreds of classical and Christian texts, illustrates his commitment to scholarship and his ability to wield knowledge as a form of authority. However, his arrogance and confrontational style often antagonized both allies and opponents, amplifying the intensity of the conflict. It was a reminder that in Byzantium, personal charisma could be as influential as formal power structures. The broader political context also cannot be ignored. Emperor Michael III's support for Photius was partly motivated by his desire to curb the influence of entrenched aristocratic factions associated with Ignatius. In turn, Photius leveraged imperial backing to consolidate his position, knowing that the legitimacy of church authority in Constantinople was deeply tied to the emperor's favor. This symbiosis between church and state created a tension that reverberated across Byzantium and into relations with Rome. The trial highlighted the complexities of governance in an empire where spiritual authority and imperial power were inseparable yet constantly negotiating boundaries. The conflict eventually reached a temporary resolution, but it left a lasting impact on the Byzantine Church and its relations with Rome. In 867, Ignatius was restored to the Patriarchate after the assassination of Michael III, and Photius was deposed, exiled, and later reconciled with the Church. Yet, the intellectual and theological contributions of Photius endured. His arguments on church autonomy and the balance between imperial authority and ecclesiastical governance influenced later debates, particularly as the Byzantine Church faced ongoing tensions with both internal factions and external powers. The Photian Schism became a touchstone for understanding how personal ambition, theological rigor, and political calculation could intersect in the history of Christianity. From a historical perspective, the trial of Photius is not just a story of an individual patriarch, it is emblematic of a period in which the Byzantine Empire struggled to define the limits of state power over the Church. It shows how legal and canonical principles could be invoked to serve political ends, and how intellectual authority could bolster claims to spiritual legitimacy. Photius' life and trial reflect the intricate interplay of law, theology, and politics in Byzantium, a civilization where ideology and pragmatism were constantly entwined. Moreover, the trial highlights the role of communication and negotiation in resolving, or exacerbating, conflicts between church and state. Letters, synods, and public proclamations were weapons in a contest that transcended personal disputes, involving an entire empire and reaching as far as Rome. The trial's enduring lesson is that authority, whether spiritual or temporal, is rarely absolute, it is negotiated, defended, and contested at every level. Photius' experience demonstrates that intellectual acumen, strategic alliances, and an understanding of institutional power are crucial in navigating the precarious terrain of governance and religion. In retrospect, the story of Photius offers profound insights into the Byzantine worldview, where the emperor and patriarch were co-architects of spiritual and temporal order, yet their relationship was fraught with rivalry and tension. The trial exemplifies the challenges of leadership, the intersection of personal and institutional ambitions, and the ways in which theological reasoning could be mobilized to justify political actions. It also reminds us that history is often shaped not just by events themselves, but by how individuals interpret, argue, and assert authority over those events. Ultimately, the trial of Patriarch Photius serves as a case study in the delicate balance of power in medieval Christendom. It reveals how one man's intellect and ambition could ignite a controversy that resonated across empires, affecting church policy, imperial governance, and international relations. His story underscores that the struggle between church and state is not merely theoretical, it is lived, personal, and often messy. In the figure of Photius, we see both the potential for human brilliance to influence institutions and the inevitable friction that arises when authority is contested. For a modern audience, Photius' trial resonates as a timeless example of institutional conflict, the politics of legitimacy, and the enduring importance of balancing power between competing authorities. It is a reminder that history is rarely black and white, and that understanding the nuances of legal, theological, and political interactions is key to interpreting any epoch. Byzantium, through the lens of Photius, teaches us that authority is both a gift and a responsibility, constantly negotiated, and never absolute.